Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Gardener. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's September 17th. Listener Rebecca Stoner Kirts recently shared a photo in the Facebook group. The picture was of her transplanted iris, along with an enchanting caption that I couldn't resist sharing with you. She wrote, "Mom's 50-year iris, rescued and replanted. Mom always told me they like their own space and plant them like ducks floating on a pond." There you go, Mom. Great picture and great story. Rebecca's mom's analogy of planting iris like ducks floating on the pond is a good one to remember. As I mentioned on a show a while back, iris don't like to be buried. They don't like to be planted too deep. So yes to dividing them and yes to replanting. But when you do replant them, let them skim the surface of your garden. I like to nestle mine in just a bit, and then I stake them so that they don't fall over and that they can stand up and get used to their new place in the garden. Here's today's brevities. Today is the anniversary of the death of Olaus Rudbeck, who died on this day in 1702. Rudbeck was born in Sweden. He was a Renaissance man. He contributed to medicine, especially anatomy. One of his most important discoveries came when he was just 22 years old. Rudbeck discovered the lymphatic vessels and the lymphatic system in 1650. And Rudbeck was a professor at the University of Uppsala, where he taught medicine, botany, mathematics, astronomy, and architecture. 1702 will forever be remembered in Swedish history as the year Uppsala burned. The fire swept through the town and made its way to the university. Rudbeck was 72 years old, and he ran to the top of the theater where he taught anatomy to direct the firemen and the people trying to save the campus. He reportedly could be heard even over the din of the chaos. While he was directing activities at the university, he was informed that his own home and his personal collections and writings were on fire. Rudbeck did not leave his post, and thanks to him, the university library and the valuable collections that were there were saved. When the fire was extinguished, Rudbeck walked home through the town of Uppsala, which lay in ruin, and he immediately began to draw up plans for the city. His vision was carried out without him. Rudbeck died 4 months later on this day in 1702. 29 years later, Carl Linnaeus, the father of plant taxonomy, named Rudbeckia, or the black-eyed Susan, after his patron Olaus Rudbeck. On July 29th, 1731, Linnaeus wrote with admiration about his old professor, saying, "So long as the earth shall survive, and as each spring shall see it covered with flowers, the Rudbeckia will preserve your glorious name." Black-eyed Susans are a favorite of gardeners. They bloom continuously from about mid-July until the first frost. The black-eyed Susan is a tremendous pollinator plant. As a member of the daisy family, they offer that great daisy shape and give the garden a warm yellow color. And all that black-eyed Susans require is sun. And all gardeners need to do is enjoy them and remember to cut a few to bring indoors. They're a fantastic cut flower. They play nice in bouquets, and they look great as a solo flower in a vase. There have been new varieties of black-eyed Susans introduced over the past couple decades. In honor of the 150th anniversary of the city of Denver, the Denver Daisy was introduced in 2008. It was a cross between the Rudbeckia hirta species and the Rudbeckia prairie sun. One of my personal favorites is the Rudbeckia hirta cherry brandy. Imagine a red black-eyed Susan. That's basically cherry brandy. Simply gorgeous. When I was researching Olaus Rudbeck, I ran across two fascinating stories about him from a biographical piece by a woman named Frederica Rowan. I'll share the first one now, and I'll tell you the other at the end of the show. Here we go. Olaus Rudbeck, the man honored with the black-eyed Susan, apparently had the voice of an angel. He also had great taste, and he knew how to throw a party. So, in 1660, he was put in charge of pulling together the coronation of Charles XI of Sweden, where it was reported that at a concert given in honor of the coronation, Rudbeck's voice was distinctly heard in a solo above the accompaniment of 12 trumpeters, all blowing with their whole might. And that on another occasion, when already advanced in life, Rudbeck imitated the sound of a cannon with his mouth, to the great delight of the future hero, Charles XII, who was then a boy of 7 years old, who, after seeing Rudbeck, clapped his hands with joy. And today is the anniversary of the death of Antoine Laurent Jussieu, who died on this day in 1836. Jussieu was a French botanist who developed the first natural classification of flowering plants. Today, there's a metro station near the Botanical Garden in Paris that is named in honor of the Jussieu family, which boasted 5 members over several generations as notable botanists. The 2 oldest Jussieu brothers, Antoine and Bernard, were both botany professors in Paris. Bernard was the stronger botanist of the 2 brothers. Once, after botanizing in Lebanon, Bernard shared his water with the little Lebanon cedar seedling he was bringing back to Paris. The seedling lived to be over 200 years old and 80 feet high. As for Bernard Jussieu, he began organizing the garden at Versailles in a more natural order, but he wouldn't tell others his method for organizing the plants. Antoine Laurent Jussieu was Antoine's son and Bernard's nephew. When he came of age, he trained under his uncle for 4 years, and Bernard recognized in Antoine Laurent the person with whom he could trust his work. As a result, Jussieu began his work as an extension of his Uncle Bernard's ideas around grouping plants. It took Jussieu almost 20 years of refinement and perfecting, but he finally published his work on natural classification just as the Bastille was falling in 1789. In Genera Plantarum, Jussieu kept Linnaeus's binomial nomenclature, but he grouped plants by genera and then into families. He called his system natural, and he strived to let nature be his guide. Today, many plant families can be attributed to Jussieu. And today is the anniversary of the death of the Scottish horticulturist known as the Daffodil King, Peter Barr, who died on this day at the age of 84 years old in 1909. Since Queen Victoria was not a fan of daffs, Barr had much to overcome. At his home in Surrey, he bred over 2 million daffodils, and he traveled the world over to get them. Not surprisingly, people would travel from all around to see the spring profusion of 120 separate daffodil varieties at Barr's nursery. Over time, Barr earned the moniker the Daffodil King, and he's credited as the man who popularized the daffodil. At one point, the Peter Barr daffodil, a large white trumpet variety, commanded $250 a bulb. When Barr retired, he went to Scotland and he grew primroses. 2 years before his death, when he was interviewed, Barr mused, "I wonder who will plant my grave with primroses." When Barr died, his obituary stated he was known from one end of Great Britain to the other. After Barr's death, the Royal Horticultural Society has awarded the Peter Barr Memorial Cup for excellence in daffodils. Today, in about 5 days, there will be a grand plaque unveiling at Barr's English home, celebrating the Daffodil King, Peter Barr. In Unearthed Words, here's a poem from Cecil Cavendish called The Milkweed. The milkweed pods are breaking, and the bits of silken down float off among the autumn breeze across the meadows brown. And here's a thought about September from Alexander Thoreau. September. It was the most beautiful of words, he'd always felt, evoking orange flowers, swallows, and regret. Today's book recommendation is Hot Color, Dry Garden by Nan Sturman. This is a fantastic book for gardeners looking to have a colorful garden that's also drought tolerant. Nan, who also writes a gardening column for the San Diego Union Tribune, offers incredible sustainable designs and more than 150 fantastic plant selections for the water-wise gardener. If you think a dry garden can't be colorful, think again. Nan shows you the plants that pack the most punch color-wise, and she challenges all of us to stop thinking dry means drab. Here's today's garden chore. Nudge your pumpkins along in time for Halloween. You can do this a number of ways. One of the simplest things you can do is to remove any leaves that are shadowing the fruit. And you can also elevate your pumpkins by putting them on a piece of wood to prevent rot. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. All right, as promised, here's the second remarkable story about Olaus Rudbeck that I hope you'll carry with you and share with others, especially if you teach horticulture in some fashion or work with kids in hort. When Rudbeck was first appointed assistant professor of medicine at the University of Uppsala, Rudbeck was quite intent on sharing everything he had learned about botany. He had prepared a display of his collection, and then he'd put together a lecture about it, talking all about the new seeds and roots that he'd brought with him from his travels abroad. But the students at the time thought botany was a topic for old ladies or apothecaries or pharmacists, and they derided anyone with an interest in the topic by calling them a grass reader. Rudbeck, who was clearly out of touch with the perception of botany, expected to find his lecture room filled. He waited hour after hour, but not one person showed up. Then Frederica Rowan wrote this about Rudbeck, and it's just so incredibly moving. Here's what she said. His disappointment was great. For once, the brave spirit gave way, and he burst into tears. But recovering from his momentary weakness, he determined, in spite of the existing indifference, to do for botany what he had done for anatomy. He forthwith set about converting a piece of ground which he possessed in Uppsala into a botanical garden, with hothouses and bowers and shady walks and parterres resplendent with the variegated hues of the newly imported plants, to attract by beauty those whom science lacked charms to lure. And when his task was completed, and knots of admiring visitors gathered round him in his garden, he would assume the character of a peripatetic lecturer and instill knowledge into them, even against their will, thus breaking the ground for Linnaeus, whose fame was to outshine his own in the annals of botany, and laying the foundations of the very garden, the renown of which was to become worldwide under his great successor. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up, and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.